in holiday reps.
From the studios of ITN, the news with Nicholas Owen and Julia Somerville.
Hello, welcome to the programme.
The headlines so far today: going to the supermarket for new savings schemes, but government plans have a shock for the better off. Earl Spencer's divorce battle is over. How much has he agreed to pay? And it's snow, it's chaos, and there's more on the way.
A scheme to turn millions more of us into regular savers was launched this morning by the government. The accounts will be known as ISAs, individual savings accounts. They'll be tax-free like Tessas and PEPs. Investors will be able to save small amounts and use supermarkets as well as banks.
But, and it's a big but for some existing savers, there'll be an upper limit. No one will be able to have more than £50,000 in total, so some people who've built up large Tessa and PEP holdings will have to sell if they are above the limit. Our business editor Mark Webster reports.
Since many people have no savings at all, the government's aim is to encourage 6 million new investors to open the tax-free account. People will be able to save up to £5,000 a year in a scheme which should be much simpler than existing tax-free arrangements. But the public remains sceptical.
I wondered what effect it would have on my little Tessa account, because it's my experience that what they give with one hand they take away with the other hand.
The Paymaster General spelt out the details at today's press conference, though he himself has been criticised for benefiting from a multi-million-pound trust in Guernsey. He said the new arrangements would be much fairer, though he agreed hundreds of thousands of wealthy savers will pay more tax from the 1st of April 1999.
The specific ideas we have, which are very important, are like at the checkout at the supermarket, we have a swipe card, so that this makes it accessible to them. And also, of course, we put the levels very low so that they can be encouraged to save when they see that it doesn't have to be the high level that previously applied.
But some people are going to be hit with a much higher tax bill, you know, in schemes that they've gone into thinking they were perfectly legal and lawful.
We keep coming back to this point. What I'm saying about the scheme that we've come up with now is we're going to spread that money much more fairly.
Supermarkets will be among those selling the new product. Existing tax-exempt savings accounts, Tessas, and personal equity plans, PEPs, will be gradually phased out, though it will be possible to pay capital in the new savings schemes up to the maximum limit. Even so, that will leave hundreds of thousands of people paying more tax. There will now be a period of consultation before the final details of the new savings account are announced in next year's budget. However, the acid test of whether they work or not will be whether they persuade the 1/3 of people in this country who have no savings at all to start saving. Mark Webster, ITN, Westminster.
Well, Alison Mitchell, a personal finance expert, joins me now. Well, Alison, picking up on Mark Webster's last point, are these going to be popular, do you think, among the many people who don't at the moment make much provision for saving?
Well, I mean, I don't know that they will be, because if you don't make provision at the moment, I'm not quite sure why you would go into this new ISA. I suppose the one thing is you don't have to lock your money up, and there's no minimum, so you could, I suppose, put £10, £20 in. So maybe they'll help, particularly if you can pay in money at the Tesco's checkout.
Now, what about this business of going to the supermarket? Isn't the slight drawback there that people might worry about getting the right advice?
Well, I have a great worry about this, actually, because they are being called individual savings accounts. In fact, you can only put £1,000 in as cash, getting interest on the money. The rest either has to go in shares, or it can go in as premiums to an insurance policy. But a lot of people who've perhaps never had money in shares before might go into this thinking it's a savings account, pay in more than £1,000, and find that they've actually bought something from a supermarket checkout that's invested in the stock market. And they may indeed have had no advice on this whatsoever, and suddenly find that the stock market falls, and for the first time ever, their money's gone down rather than up.
Now, drawbacks for the better off for people who've got a lot of PEPs and Tessas already.
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a serious drawback here, and in fact some people are saying it's taxed by the back door, because if you've got more than £50,000 in a personal equity plan at the moment, there's nothing you can do to transfer that across. You've either got to start paying capital gains and income tax on the dividends on that money, or you've just got to cash it in. You can only put £50,000 across, and the people that will be particularly hit are anyone who's using a PEP to run alongside their mortgage, what are known as PEP mortgages. Now, these people expected that to run for the 25-year term of the mortgage. As soon as it hits £50,000, that's all, if it's there already, that's all they can put into the ISA. It can grow once it's in there, but you can't put more into it.
Alison Mitchell, thank you.
Lawyers for the Earl and Countess Spencer are discussing the final details of their divorce, which should go through tomorrow. A settlement thrashed out in court last night will end their 8-year marriage. It'll also end the couple's highly publicised and bitter courtroom battle. It's believed the Earl has agreed to pay his estranged wife £2 million. John Irvine reports from Cape Town.
This morning, the barristers from the two sides were killing time. Cape Town is 2 hours ahead of Britain, and they were waiting for the London banks to open so that settlement funds could be transferred. Last night, after 11 hours of talks, the Countess and the Earl left their lawyers' chambers separately. Neither of them made any comment. Their two barristers, however, could barely conceal their delight at reaching an agreement.
Do you want us to kiss each other, shall we?
They handed out a statement in which the Earl and Countess said they unreservedly withdrew all allegations made in relation to each other. They said they recognised that both had contributed to the sad breakdown of their marriage, and they were going to try to rebuild a civilised and friendly arrangement whereby their children would continue to prosper. No details of the settlement were announced, but it's clear the Countess was given a much improved offer, a lump sum of around £2 million plus her house in Cape Town. It leaves her free to remarry without penalty. Maintenance, as originally offered, would have stopped if she had found a new husband. This morning, Earl Spencer's PR representative said he was pleased that the dispute had been resolved.
Earl Spencer's delighted that the events of the last week have been brought to a conclusion, and that for the sake of the children they can both move on to their future lives, and that all the allegations against him have been withdrawn.
That said, damage has been done to the Earl's reputation and standing, and he may ponder the wisdom of not using British courts where divorce proceedings are heard in private. Tomorrow, Earl Spencer will take the witness stand here, but not to answer questions about his personal life or to make accusations about his wife. Instead, he will simply confirm that their marriage is over. The court will then rubber stamp their divorce, and this rather embarrassing saga will come to an end. John Irvine, ITN, Cape Town.
The Foreign Secretary opened an international conference on Nazi gold this morning with these words: "We are here to clarify one of the darkest episodes of human history." The conference will investigate what happened to almost £380 million in gold stolen by the Nazis and will discuss ways of compensating surviving victims. Kevin Dunn reports.
The initial success of this conference has simply been to bring so many countries, including Germany and Switzerland, together to attempt to finally resolve, 50 years on, the issue of Nazi gold. Delegates from more than 40 nations are attending the conference to decide how to distribute to the survivors of the Holocaust proceeds from looted gold still in Western banks. The man largely responsible for the conference is the former Labour MP, Lord Janner.
This is a wonderful conference. It is a great moral occasion, and I'm absolutely delighted that all 42 nations invited will be here, and I'm sure we're going to get constructive, significant and practical results.
The Nazis looted millions of pounds worth of gold, mostly from the reserves of occupied countries, but also from the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, whose gold rings and fillings were melted down to finance Hitler's war. About £40 million worth of gold is still in British and American reserves. Opening the conference, the Foreign Secretary said that should be distributed to individual survivors.
To those who are still alive, we must ensure that the unbearable tragedy of living through the Holocaust is not compounded by an old age marked by the fear and sadness of poverty.
The pressure is now on countries like Switzerland, which received most of the gold, to open their vaults and compensate the victims. The conference will last 3 days, and its main achievement is likely to be an agreement to meet again next year, when not only Nazi gold will be discussed, but also the fate of millions of art treasures also looted by the Nazis. Kevin Dunn, ITN, at Lancaster House.
The row over cheap beef imports intensified today, with more confrontations between Welsh farmers and Irish truckers. 6 lorries were turned away from the port of Fishguard early today as the Irish and British governments tried to sort out the dispute. From Fishguard, Tim Rogers reports.
Stop them! Tempers frayed for a second night as the Welsh farmers refused to let the imports through. The lorries stopped. The farmers demanded to check their loads to see which were carrying cheap meat.
It's sealed. Don't man there witnesses that you break the seal. I'll show you what's in it.
More than 200 farmers blockaded the port, angry at what they say is the government's failure to compensate them for tumbling meat prices and cheap imports, which are undermining their livelihood. After the confrontations, the Irish drivers were persuaded to turn back.
If they insist we go back, we haven't much option when they go back, have we?
6 lorries in all, carrying more than £500,000 worth of meat. But meeting afterwards, the farmers were unrepentant.
The anger and the frustration is very deep because I am seeing, we are seeing our businesses going down the drain very slowly.
The Irish government is demanding that in future the police enforce a rite of passage. But the police say that's difficult.
You can never guarantee at a particular moment in time. What we would seek to do is to maintain public order as best we possibly can and to reach compromises with the two factions.
But the Irish government is insisting that it is given a guarantee that Irish lorries will be able to pass through Welsh ports safely in future. In the meantime, British farming unions and the government are hoping that the farmers will be satisfied that their point has been made. But further demonstrations can't be ruled out at this stage. Tim Rogers, ITN, Fishguard.
Still to come in the programme, dramatic pictures from Australia, where hundreds of bushfires are now burning out of control on the outskirts of Sydney.
And World Cup build-up. England and Scotland hear their rankings for next year's tournament.
Before that, the first real taste of winter for many parts of the country brought chaos today after overnight snowfalls. Last night in Cumbria, the temperature plunged to -8. Traffic was brought to a standstill in parts of Kent and Surrey because of the snow. More snowfalls are forecast for tonight. Lauren Taylor reports.
Traffic ground to a halt in several areas of the country this morning as temperatures dropped sharply, causing rain to turn to snow. In Cumbria, even after roads had been gritted, they remained icy. Temperatures had fallen to -8 degrees. Parts of the southeast were also affected. In Kent, snow was settling, mainly on high ground, and police warned drivers to take extra care after several minor accidents. In Surrey, the diggers were out, clearing the worst affected country roads. Weather forecasters say there could be more snow in the east in the next couple of days. Snow and frost are likely to affect Suffolk again. It had some of the heaviest falls last night. That will mean more dangerous driving conditions. Snowdonia's hills had a covering of snow, but forecasters say by the end of the week temperatures are expected to rise slightly. But on the strength of today's weather, one bookmaker has already dropped the odds on a white Christmas. Lauren Taylor, ITN.
Well, weather forecaster Martin Davis joins us now from the ITV Weather Centre. Martin, is it unusual for such widespread snow this early in the winter?
It's not really. The first snow of the season always comes as a bit of a shock, doesn't it? Especially in the southeast, but it's not that unusual. Even last year, I think we had snow earlier than this in November, but it's certainly unusual, I suppose, for us to have such a mixture of winter's weather right across the country at the same time.
And I suppose in Scotland they'd be well used to it by now, wouldn't they?
They are, made far less of a fuss about it, I guess, as well. But they have had the heaviest snowfalls in northern parts of Scotland. In the southeast, we've had less snow, but it's caused more disruption, as it always does.
Well, as you say, it only takes a flake of snow to fall on London for us to be talking about white winters and white Christmases and so on. You're going to stick your neck out on that one?
7 to 1, I think, the current odds are, aren't they? And I'd go along with that. It's pretty much about average. We have one white Christmas in about 8, I think, roughly. So it's too far ahead, certainly, for us to put any meteorology into it.
Well, what about slightly nearer to now? What about the next few days?
Well, I think for the next couple of days, it's going to stay very, very cold. More problems on the roads, more snow showers in the east. But towards the end of the week and through the weekend, it's probably going to warm up back to the sort of mild westerlies.
Martin Davis, thanks very much.
Now to the more serious consequences of weather of a very different kind. Bushfires raging out of control in Australia's heatwave. Exhausted firefighters are desperately trying to contain 400 separate fires. In their path, a nuclear power plant and Sydney's outer suburbs. 2 firemen have died in the battle with the flames. Chris Roberts reports.
At their worst, they're 100 miles wide and out of control. Despite the efforts of more than 1,500 firefighters, the forest blazes continue to spread, eating their way through hundreds of thousands of acres of land.
Get out there, go!
Those caught in its path have little choice but to abandon their homes, bricks and mortar proving to be no defence against the flames. The firefighters on the front line, meanwhile, have taken casualties. 2 men died of burns as they fought one blaze northwest of Sydney. A number of others have been injured.
I take the opportunity on behalf of the Australian Government to express our very deep sadness and sympathy to the families of those brave people.
Firefighters are braving conditions as bad, if not worse, than the last major bushfires of January 1994. The flames are now engulfing houses in the southern suburbs of Sydney. Clouds of smoke, clear evidence as to the fire's proximity. Homeowners are reduced to desperate and largely futile defences. Dozens of houses have already been razed, and weather forecasters predict that tinder-dry conditions will help the fires claim dozens more as the week continues. Chris Roberts, ITN.
Now for some more of the day's news. Legal moves have begun to trademark Princess Diana's image. Lawyers acting for her memorial fund have applied for 26 official photographs to be patented. They want to prevent unsuitable use of her image and boost the charity's income.
The government's launched its £2 million Christmas anti-drink driving campaign with the slogan, "None for the road." The message is that drinking alcohol, even within legal limits, can impair your driving.
And the wrestler Big Daddy has died. He was 60. The former miner, whose real name was Shirley Crabtree, suffered a stroke 2 months ago. His wife was with him when he died in hospital early this morning.
Now, how often do you hear people reminiscing about the good old days when it was safe for children to play on the street? Well, one organisation, the Children's Play Council, wants to reclaim the streets for youngsters. It wants to see areas set aside for children to play. The so-called home zones would include more pedestrianised areas near homes, a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit for cars and car-sharing schemes to reduce traffic on the roads. Well, earlier I spoke to Tim Gill, who's the director of the Children's Play Council, and to Jackie Lang, a headmistress who says it's time to stop mollycoddling children. First, I asked Tim Gill if the idea of home zones was realistic.
We think it is realistic. Home zones are very well tested in Germany, in Holland. They're getting into them in Austria. And they're really a way of transforming the way we think about streets, but they're practical as well, so I see no reason why we shouldn't have them here in the UK.
And it's not just a question of shutting streets off to traffic, is it? There's more to it than that.
Oh no, in fact, quite the opposite. Traffic will still be able to move freely down the streets, but the point is that in home zones, the traffic would have to give way to pedestrians and cyclists, and also the speed limits would be very low, 10 miles an hour or less, so that the street could be reclaimed as a public space for pedestrians and children and could be taken away from the dominance of the car that we so often see in our streets.
Well, Jacqueline Lang, last week you were saying that parents who were too timid were responsible for stifling their children's sense of adventure and that many children had very little idea how to cope with the ordinary everyday risks of life. Do you think that this type of scheme would help in that direction?
I think it might. I wasn't actually complaining about parents. I was saying that I sympathised with them because they had been convinced that the world was a desperately dangerous place and they mustn't ever let their children out of their sight. And schools are suffering from exactly that kind of fear too. So anything like this scheme, which is going to allow parents to have a bit more peace of mind, could probably be a step in the right direction.
So it would help the parents, but would it actually help the children? Because it would still be very much a controlled, rather artificial environment.
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction, but not the overall solution to everything. But I think that if children have this kind of controlled way of gradually learning how to cross a road safely, how to watch out for traffic that isn't going to be hurtling along, that's a very good way of beginning their training in coping with risks.
Well, Tim Gill, I suppose that the key to this, as with so much, is getting the government behind the idea of it and indeed possibly having to spend some money. Are you hopeful that that might happen?
Yes, we are. We recognise that it's still a new idea for people in this country, although, as I say, it's very common in many other European countries. But today we're calling on government and parliament to bring in new laws to allow home zones to be created. And we're also asking government for some seed funding so we can try out home zones in this country, see how they work, and take it from there, really.
Tim Gill, thank you very much indeed, and Jacqueline Lang, thank you very much.
Football now, and England got a result they didn't want in the seedings for the World Cup finals next summer. They weren't among the top 8 seeds, which means they'll have to play one of them in the early stages. Here's our sports reporter, Peter Staunton.
Ladies and gentlemen, fresh from the M4 and the Chiswick flyover, the England coach Glenn Hoddle.
A busy day for the England coach, who began it by accidentally upstaging the Prime Minister. Glenn Hoddle and Tony Blair were at Lancaster Gate to spearhead a drive against racism in football. Earlier at a nearby school, the former England player showed that his skills are as sharp as ever. Hoddle, though, had World Cup matters on his mind. On Thursday, he'll discover the group which his team will be in next year. The bad news, which he received a short time ago, is that England won't be one of the 8 seeded teams in the draw. Their brave performance in Rome, when a 0-0 draw against Italy raised them to number 6 in the current world ratings, wasn't enough to impress FIFA, the world's governing body. Italy will be seeded, however. Only previous World Cup form is taken into account, and England's failure to qualify for the '94 tournament following defeat by Holland was the deciding factor. England's best option now might be to get drawn in the group which is headed by Brazil, the favourites, who beat England earlier this year. Even if they lost, England could still get through, but wouldn't meet Brazil again until the final. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport.
The main news again. The government launched the latest savings scheme this morning, ISAs, individual savings accounts. Like Tessas and PEPs, which they'll gradually replace, they'll be tax-free, but they've already come under fire for having an upper limit of £50,000. Lawyers for the Earl and Countess Spencer are finalising details of their divorce, which is expected to go through tomorrow. It's believed the Earl has agreed to pay his estranged wife £2 million. While we've been on air, it's been reported that Annie Linsell, who won a landmark legal ruling in October to allow her to receive pain-killing drugs which could kill her, has died.
Before we go, a glimpse of the Queen meeting the current Queens of Pop. It happened under the bright lights at last night's Royal Variety performance, where the Spice Girls performed 2 of their numbers. The Queen told them she knew all about them from Prince Harry, who met them in South Africa. The Royal Variety performance will be screened on ITV this weekend.
And that's all from us. John Souchet will be here with the early evening news, as usual, at 5:40.
And we're back tomorrow at the same time, 12:30. Till then, goodbye.
Goodbye.
A savings scheme designed for sale at the supermarket checkout. The government wants lower income groups to put more money aside.